All right, well, on today's episode, we are going to drive a 240 that we've been working on for way too long. Our friend Kevin's car. So it's finally done, and we have to seat the rings and break in the engine because it was rebuilt. So we're just going to kind of show you our process and give you some pointers along the way. This will probably be more like a vlog type video as we go on, but I just wanted to mention two things before we start. Two important things, at least I think they're pretty important. This is kind of, a lot of this video is going to be opinion based, so you'll see as we go along. First thing, break-in oil. You want to make sure you're using break-in oil. Specifically, don't use synthetic oil, but find a good break-in oil, whichever you prefer. We use Motul. And make sure you're using that for the first couple hundred miles, because that's going to help the ring seat as well. So this is definitely important. Second thing that's important that I don't think many people are aware of is the tune. We have a base tune we're putting on the Power FC. We got lucky. We're actually using a tune from another car because it's set up almost exactly the same as this one. But the main thing with the tune is you actually don't want the tune to be super rich or more rich than normal, because the fuel going into the cylinders are going to mess up the cylinder walls as you're trying to seat the rings. So I'm not saying it should be lean, but I'm saying it should have some type of base tune on it. You know, that's better than just you threw injectors in the car and you have a stock ECU and now you're going to break in a freshly built motor. That's not really the way you should be doing it. You should get a base tune from your tuner so you can seat the rings and set the engine up. All right, so that's basically the only two things I really wanted to mention. So we'll jump in the car and I'll explain more of what we usually do, from first cranking the engine, getting oil pressure, to bleeding the coolant, to actually driving the car and how we would drive it for the first 50 miles or less. And that's it. Follow me. Yep. Get over here, man. You guys are gonna miss a lot of this because we already did it. So I'm gonna run you through what we did. So step one, you put your engine in, got everything bolted down, checked everything. Everything's tight, everything's good to go. You just did a full rebuild. What do you do first? Are you ready to start? You gotta make sure it's got oil pressure, okay? This is the most important step, I would say. Because if you don't have oil pressure and you fire this engine up, that's not good. Like, you wanna make sure you got oil pressure before you even let the car start running. That was a weird way to say that, but what I'm trying to say is you gotta unplug the CAS. So, step one, if you unplug that, the injectors are not gonna work and the car is not gonna send any spark. So on an SR20, this is the easiest way to stop the car from starting. What else do we do? I'm just trying to think of all the little tricks. This is definitely one of the main tricks. So there's an oil squirter in here. Let me see if I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it, but there's an oil squirter right in there. Probably not good, there's smoke coming out. Hopefully you'll see that in the video. Yeah, I gotta see those rings. Yeah, there's an oil squirter up top. So that's the highest point as far as oil pressure goes, is that oil squirter. So if you see oil squirting onto the camshaft, then you know your oil pressure is probably pretty good. If that's not squirting oil on your camshaft as you're cranking it, that means you don't have proper oil pressure yet. So you don't want to plug in the CAS and you don't want to start it until that has oil pressure. Now, how do you get that? Because we've run into problems before where we're cranking it and there's no oil pressure. We're cranking it to the point where it's a little bit too long for me to be comfortable with. So if things are rotating in the engine and they have no oil pressure, you're getting excessive wear for no reason. So how do you get oil pressure? What's some tips and tricks? We figured out a couple. So the first one I'll mention is, it's kind of impossible to see on here. Oh, we do have another engine. Let's go to the other engine and look around. So Things I have done before is remove the oil filter. First of all, fill the oil filter with oil. And also, I think we put like some kind of funnel into the oil filter housing. And I poured oil into that, and then I removed it and I put this back on. Another way to do that is to remove the pressure sensor, put oil in there. Basically, you need to get oil in here somehow because the oil's down in the pan and it's trying to suck it up through the whole engine, but sometimes that's just not enough. Especially, you gotta remember the engine's bare. There's no oil in any of the galleys, so you gotta figure out ways to get oil in the engine from other directions other than the oil pan. This is definitely one of them. So you could either do it through the small temp sensor, or well, it would be the oil pressure sending area, which is what a lot of people do, or they remove this cap and they put it in through there. Or like I did, I just removed the oil. Specifically on this one, I removed the oil filter and we poured oil into this and put the filter back on with oil filter. It was messy, but it worked. Second tip would be overfill the oil pan. Now, I don't mean fill the oil. I don't mean put like 5 gallons of oil in it. I mean put an extra couple quarts, maybe. You might only need 1. That seemed to be the biggest trick that we did on this one that worked. So that is definitely the most important thing. And the first thing you got to do. Things to avoid: cranking the engine for a long time with no oil pressure. That would be the main thing to avoid. So if you fill it with the normal capacity of oil, if you don't do any of the tricks we just mentioned on the oil filter housing, and you're cranking it for like 15, 20 seconds, and you still don't have oil coming out of the squirter up top, you should stop and you should do some of the tricks we just mentioned, because you don't want to keep going like that. You're just causing excessive wear for no reason. So that's the first thing. Yeah, so that's the first step. And then once you see oil coming out of that squirter, you're good to start it. So the next thing to mention would be, do you have aftermarket camshafts? And do they require a break-in? So you need to find that out. It seems that most camshafts we've used for SR20s, no one mentions anything about a break-in, which is kind of strange. Me personally, I still like to keep the revs up when you first start the engine. This shouldn't be a problem because what you're gonna have to do next is bleed the coolant before you go drive the car. So you're gonna be fluctuating the idle anyway if you want to bleed it faster. So while I'm doing that, I'm just trying to keep the engine above idle, because new camshafts, aftermarket ones, do not like to be run at idle. Oil pressures are lower, and the bedding process for those I think it's usually keep it at 2,000 to 3,000 RPMs for somewhere around 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the camshaft manufacturer. So just something to keep note of. If you have stock cams in there and everything, you don't have to do that, but I still like to keep the RPMs higher. Basically, you're trying to not have the car idle for a long amount of time until you seat the rings. Now, this is all very hard to do when you first start the engine because, one, you're trying to check for leaks. You have to bleed the coolant still. You can't go take the car out with no coolant or a bunch of air in the system. It's going to overheat. So last night we ended up bleeding this before we left, bleeding the coolant. So we just backed it up, highest point right here, put a funnel on it, bled it like we normally would bleed, and we just made sure nothing was leaking as we were doing this. And I kept the RPMs pretty high. It was a cold night last night, so it took a while to bleed. We're gonna go on a first drive and try to seat the rings properly, or at least show you guys how we do it. And that's that. This car hasn't moved in a long time, and me and Malcolm are just gonna set sail and throw caution to the wind. Oh. That's the term, right? Throw caution to the wind?
It beats me, I don't know.
I think that's it. Okay. All right, so things to mention. Well, there was something I forgot to mention earlier, but get your engines honed when you rebuild them. That was the tip. Because if you don't get your cylinder walls honed, this is almost pointless, I want to say. Honing is a very, very important procedure. So make sure you do that. That's it. All right, so this car is obviously not complete yet. We're waiting on an e-brake assembly to come in before we put the center console back in. So our AFR gauge is kind of just sitting here. AFR gauge, definitely something you want to have in the car if you just rebuilt an engine. I mean, you don't have to have it, but at least know that your tune is proper. That's the only reason it's important to have that, so that we know that we're not running really rich. Because if you're running really rich, the fuel is going to coat the cylinder walls and it's going to hinder the ring procedure. I'm sure you'll be getting a call from us in about 5 minutes.
Hey, we need a tow.
Yeah. Don't fucking say that. Well, it's not about the engine, it's about the suspension. All right, anyway, yeah, so AFR gauge, I don't know. I think it's mandatory, but some would say you really don't need it. So just make sure your car's not running rich. Just run it rich. It's safe if it's rich. Not right now. This is not the time you want it to be running rich. Any other time, yes, I get what you're saying. It's safer than running lean. But right now, not a great idea. So we have the original oil we put in this. We're going to go do this. It's not going to take long. I'm going to do like 9 pulls with a lot of load on the engine, and we're going to work our way up to full throttle. But I'm still not going to bring the RPMs up too high. And then after that, we're going to come back, and then we're going to change the oil, because I really don't want to keep that oil in there. Some people would leave the oil in there for 500 miles. I'm not one of those people. So, all right, let's fire this thing up. We got the Power FC here. I'm gonna give it a couple minutes. But like I said, I don't want to let the car idle for a long period of time. But we've already bled the coolant last night. It was, the car's already been running. So a lot of things you'll read online is all these braking procedures. Like, yeah, start it, make sure you got oil pressure, then throw it together and go drive it hard as hell. What about the coolant? No one ever mentions coolant or bleeding coolant. That's a big time frame that you need to sit with the car stationary and fluctuate the idle and get the air out of the system. It's a long time. So, engine builders don't want to tell you about that part, but they just want you to go and seat the rings immediately. But you can't really do that. Let's hope this thing gets down the block. All right, so I'm not going to worry about anything until I get on the highway. That's the only area where I'm going to be able to actually do what I need to do. So right now, I'm just going to worry about not letting the car idle and getting to the highway and not getting pulled over. So I'm just going to keep the RPMs up a little bit. A lot of people don't do any of this. So like I said, this is mostly opinion based. There's a lot of different arguments everywhere. Different engine builders will tell you different things. But when you're in a Ferrari, this is how you gotta do this. So one more thing to mention, let's say you are taking this thing on a break-in drive. Other than doing the pulls and whatnot, if you're just driving this thing to put miles on it, make sure you're not cruising. Let's say you're on the highway and you're just cruising in 5th gear and you're at, 3,000 to 2,500 RPM. Not ideal. You want to keep the RPMs fluctuating. So you don't want to just be cruising for a long amount of time. So city driving would actually be more preferred when you're trying to put on those break-in miles. So yeah, just something to keep note of. All right, so now we're getting on the highway. So now I'm going to start what I wanted to do, which is basically, I'm going to do 9 different pulls, and we're going to add more and more throttle. So right now I'm going to do the first one. So I want the engine to have a lot of load on it. Now we can, well, halfway I guess, we'll close the windows. So I want the engine to have a lot of load on it. So I'm going to go in 4th gear. That's a decent amount of load, because the car's this is not the right gear for the car to be in. And I'm going to add about, let's say 30% of throttle. And I'm going to bring it up to about 4,000 RPM. And then I'm going to let off. And I'm going to let it engine brake. maybe get down to around 1,500, 2,000. And then I'm gonna do it again. Now we got even more load right now. We're on a hill. Same thing, same amount. I'm gonna do this 3 times, and then I'm gonna increase the throttle. Engine brake again. Engine braking is definitely a key component of this whole entire thing. It's helping clear the cylinder walls. All right, so we're coming up to a stop. All right, like I said, I want to get to 4th gear. I want a decent amount of load on this engine, so I'm shifting early, just enough. Now I'm going to add about 20-30% throttle. I'm going to let it come up to 4,000 RPM. You can go higher than that, but when you're dealing with 20-30% throttle, it's going to take a long time. Let off, let it engine brake. So that was the last step of those 3. So now I'm going to do the same thing, 4th gear, a lot of load. So now we're going to add more throttle, but we're going downhill, so that's not a lot of load on the engine. So I'm going to wait. So now I'm going to bump it up to 40-60% throttle, somewhere in there. And I'll start right now. So that was 4,500 RPM. I'm gonna start going a little higher if I can do it. That's number 2. Brought that up to 4,500 as well. So I'm getting close to 5,000. That's where I would like to be bringing this up to. Some people say bring it up to 7,000 RPM. I'm not doing that. I'm shifting early no matter what. I'm putting a lot of load on this thing. That's just what I want to do right now. Fortunately, I've got to hit the brakes here. But I upshifted, I'm letting it engine brake. I'm sorry, downshifted. Downshift again, second, let it engine brake. No one's behind me. All right. I'd count that as 1. I was okay. All right, 2,000 RPM, 4th gear. 80% throttle. All right. Trying to engine brake right now.
Got a little intense. Whoa.
All right, so we need 2 more pulls of full throttle, not full throttle, 80%. And then that's pretty much it. After that, I'm changing the oil. We're checking the car again. And I'm going to call Wags, and it's probably going to be it. I'm going to be like, look, this is what you want to do. This is what you don't want to do for the first 500 miles. And that's pretty much that. After that, we're going to change the oil again. And that's it. That's the braking procedure.
Send her off.
Yeah, I don't do any crazy long braking procedures, but I do a braking procedure. So, 4th gear. That was good. That was a good one. All right, one more. Those are all the pulls I wanted to set out and do. So, but I'm going to turn around one more time, just to see if I can get one more. I mean, the more you do, the better. It's not like you can overdo it. Oh, we're there. This is it. much it.